successful cavalry-on-cavalry engagement that ever was. So close that the Russians got to the home lines that you can see the butcher took up his sword, charged onto the nearest mount, and sallied forth. The sad thing about it was, the story has it, when he got back after the battle, in which he had fought well and 2 VCs had been won, that he was actually charged for leaving his post. But there you have it.
Injustice was shortly to be compounded by debacle. For waiting further back in the Valley of Death were the 600, the Light Brigade.
The commander of the Light Brigade, General Cardigan, said he hadn't been given orders to go, so he wouldn't. And they sat there and they watched this amazing feat of arms by the Heavy Brigade, who'd broken every rule in the book and still managed to put the enemy to flight, and they weren't allowed to join in. So by that stage, they were pretty pissed off bunnies.
Disaster or not, the story of the charge is traditionally retold on the anniversary of Balaclava. The 13th, 18th Royal Hussars very sensibly leave it to Major Willie Peter.
And from up here, Lord Raglan looked down and saw the enemy taking the forces away, or taking the guns away. And he thought, here's a chance. I will now capture the guns, because that is a sign of victory, and I will deploy the Light Brigade to do it. Now, those of you who have played Space Invaders know that the time when you press the button on the Space Invader machine, something happens on the screen immediately. You try playing Space Invaders when there's a 2-minute gap between you pressing the button and it happening on the screen, and the game is still played at the same speed. That's what it's like being a general with no radio, sitting on the top of a hill about 1 mile to 2 miles away from your forces. Everything you send has to be sent by runner or galloper or aide-de-camp down to pass on that information. Also, try and remember that prior to about 1890, there was no such thing as smokeless ammunition. So the pall of smoke that hung over a battlefield was incredible. It was as though you'd chucked 500 smoke grenades. And that's why everybody wore bright uniforms. That's why the infantry had huge colours, 6 foot by 6 foot. So that during a battle, people could see who their friends were and where their forces were. That's the difficulties that Raglan had to cope with. So he sent an order, and I'm going to read it to you so that you can understand in the light of what he believed to be happening. He said, Lord Raglan wishes the cavalry to advance rapidly to the front, follow the enemy, and try to prevent the enemy carrying away the guns. Troop horse artillery may accompany, and the French cavalry are on your left. He gave the message to a guy called Nolan, who was the 15th Hussar and as keen as mustard. Nolan went lickety-split straight down the hill to the bottom, went across to the Light Brigade. When he got to the Light Brigade, he met the commander of the cavalry, Lord Lucan, and the commander of the Light Brigade, Lord Cardigan. He handed the message to Lord Lucan, who looked up the valley. And the only guns he could see were this mass at this far end here. He couldn't see the redoubt. So he turned to Nolan and in rather a crisp voice said, "Where are the guns?" Whereupon Nolan flung his arm over his shoulder in rather an arrogant manner and said, "There, my lord, there are your guns." Lucan looked down the valley, saw the guns and went, "Christ, probably." Anyway, he then told Cardigan, who commanded the Light Brigade, that this was the time for Cardigan to go for it. Cardigan gulped, said, or is reputed to have said, "There, here go the last of the Brudenells," the family name of the Cardigans. So they set off down the valley towards the wrong gun. At this point, Nolan realised that there'd been a cock-up, because he'd been at the top with Raglan, and his arrogant little remark hadn't made much sense. So he trundles up to the front to tell Cardigan, "Wrong valley." Anyway, just as he gets there, he's about the first casualty of the Light Brigade and gets his head blown off. Cardigan thinks he's an incredibly rude and arrogant young man for trying to get in front of him, because after all, it is his charge. And he also thinks he's a bit of a wimp because as the shell tore his head off, he started to scream in rather a feminine manner.
The charge of the Light Brigade was to inspire epic literature, most of it romantic nonsense.